You know what? Before starting this YouTube channel, I used to blog. If I link to the blog today, it will be all Greek to you. Once upon a time, I did a blog about Books of Blood, Volume 1 by Clive Barker, and it was about how the first volume of the Books of Blood is a great example of how a short story collection should be. Last year, a friend of mine has published a short story collection, and we used to talk about it, and I was like, you know what, the way the stories were selected kind of reminded me of Clive Barker's Book of Blood. He was like, yes, I've read your article a lot of times, and that's how I modeled my short story collection. I was like, well, I have forgotten how I've written this thing. So I believe that it will be of some value to do a YouTube video about it. But before I go into the Books of Blood by Clive Barker, because I assume you like short story collections, then a word from our sponsors. Serve Cold, a short story collection featuring some of your favorite booktubers and horror tubers, and also yours truly. It was edited by Regina Sinclair and Steve Donahue, and the proceeds will go to charity. You can get your copy from Amazon. There's a link in the description below. Definitely, Books of Blood Volume 1 was not the first Clive Barker I've read, because I remember reading Dread from Books of Blood Volumes 2 before starting reading Volume 1, because I just read Dread, and then I was like, I rushed to get the other books in the series, and I read them start to finish. I believe I've read the first Book of Blood 3 times, and I have to say that this is probably one of the best horror collections of all time. I mean, each and every story is amazing. You get to the intro, Books of Blood. You know what? This is not a story that will stick in my mind. And there are 2 movies based on it, and both of them are mediocre. However, what makes it stand out to me is that a book with perfect stories had one that was kind of a stinker, and it was the first one. And I get why it's there. It's some sort of the host from Tales of the Crypt or Twilight Zone. And then you start and read the phrase Highways of the Dead, and it's like, you know what, you get the point. And come to think of it, I have a work in progress that uses a very similar metaphor. So yeah, this story definitely haunts me. And then again, when you reach the end of the 6th volume and you read the story on Jerusalem Street, it's just, you understand that the story, the Book of Blood, is just the front cover of the entire collection. And it's just think of it as it's in every story you read in this book is one of the narrations. I won't spoil much about it, but then you go into the midnight mid-train, and this story just bites. There is also a movie of it, and it's quite a good movie actually, and they have kept the one element that impressed me about the story, and what impressed me about the midnight mid-train is how protean it is, because it starts like a very typical slasher or splatter, and as it goes along, as it gains momentum, it leads into a cosmic horror story. Before you even realize it, it's a seamless transition from a splatter to far superior, not superior exactly, far vaster horror. It reminds me of one of my favorite horror movies of all time, Martyrs, which does the same. It starts a very typical splatter, and by the end of it, you are somewhere far, far worse. Then you get to the Yattering and Zack, because after getting so dark and deep, you get a comic story about a demon who possesses a turkey to torment a soul that is oblivious to the haunting. And yeah, it really is a great palate cleanser, because if you are into the gloom and doom, you just need to laugh before you return there, because once doom and gloom gets overwhelming, it loses its effect. That's why, for instance, we don't humor works, because if people in Buffy or Dollhouse or whatever else, they didn't joke about how they live in the murder capital of the US, or as slaves, I guess, they would break down and cry. And it'll be a bummer for you to watch this, so believe me. And then you get into Big Blood Blues, and you're back into the horror zone. It's a long story, it's a slow burn, but you know what? You've read 3 stories already, they were good, so you can take your time. You have this former police officer who works in a juvenile delinquent prison, and he notices a boy. They grow a bond, and this bond is not innocent. Let me tell you, there's some very dark stuff in this book. Clive Barker is a no-holds-barred horror author. He really goes into those very transgressive, taboo places. And here the horror is slow burn. It builds steadily until you get to the blood blues in the end, I guess. And then you get to the longest story of this volume, and that's Sex, Death and Starlight. And I'd say that it's the second worst story in the volume, but it's a satire of how show business work, because Clive Barker used to be an actor and a director before having success as an author. There is a sense of humor to it, but it's not like the other Jack. And some of the satire is nasty and definitely horrifying. It's like Death Becomes Her, if you remember that movie from the 90s, only bloodier and less comedic. But still, it's not a 5-star story, it's a 4-star story, alright? So still, the anthology is hitting in a good stride. It's very good, quality-wise. I mean, if you get a 5-star story in an anthology, it's a feat. If you get at least 2 of them or 3 of them, whoa, that's impressive. And then we get to In the Hills, the Cities, and I've talked about the story separately in another video during October, but this story is a 6-star. It's one of the best horror stories I've ever read, because the main idea is just out of this world. It's very original. The execution is worth a seminar. So as you can surmise from that, the Books of Blood is just a horror story collection with 4 amazing stories, right? Wrong. What elevates Books of Blood, Volume 1, is that it's in every story offers something completely different. Even in Volume 2 and Volume 3, it's very hard to find stories that feel similar. But then again, I remember reading the Books of Blood, and after a while, some stories are getting mixed into my head. But every story is a different subgenre of horror. I mean, if you go from Volume 1 to Volume 2, you read Dread, and that's psychological horror. It's in every story, even though it's a different subgenre, it comes out of the very fertile imagination of Clive Barker, so it twists or elevates the genre. Even if you go into one of the more traditional horror stories like the Midnight Meat Train, you get this very vivid imaginary, so it's a great splatter, and then it goes out of the rails. It goes somewhere you don't expect in a slasher or a splatter, and that's why I'll say, oh, that's what makes it so good. And even though there is differentiation between the stories, there are also themes throughout the entire book and throughout the entire Clive Barker's entire body of work. I mean, you get the Eros and Thanatos, the love, the sex and death, that they come together in every occasion. There's a lot of sexuality, along with blood and death, and sexuality can be very raw. You have this idea of monsters hiding in secret societies, in secret places under the cities, and oftentimes these monsters are not bad, they're just misunderstood or different. And this is a theme throughout Clive Barker's work. We have Cabal, who is based on this idea where the monsters are not evil, they're just monsters. You have Weaveworld, where you get this the Weaveworld that hides all the mythical creatures. I mean, Hillbound Heart, even the Cenobites, and the Lament Box that opens. And I think that this idea comes a lot. It is probably because of Clive Barker's sexuality. He was a gay man, and so I think this reflects how he have to hide, how his people have to hide in the conservative society. And also I think it's a British theme because Neil Gaiman, who is also from around this era, he's British, and as far as I know he's straight. He was part of the Gothic subculture, and this theme of a hidden world is there. So I guess it's not just about Clive Barker's sexuality. But if you want to learn something out of the Books of Blood, if you're planning to write a short story collection, this is what you should know, and this is what my friend read again and again. First of all, get a list of your short stories and pick the best. If you have some leftovers, that's your next collection. If the first one is good, if it's successful, have a second collection now with those stories. And the first story should be short. I mean, if your book is 300 pages and one of the stories is 60 pages, don't put it first. Put it halfway into the book, I guess, and probably after a couple good stories. Make certain that there is a differentiation between those stories. There should be different themes, different style, different emotion, different resonance. If some of your stories are very similar, just cram in something that feels different, so the reader can rest. And yeah, having some common themes, it's a good idea, and this is optional. You don't have to make it too on the nose, but if there are some themes that run throughout the collection, it's always interesting, and people understand that. People will get it subconsciously, and they will definitely appreciate this, or they will just ignore it. But yeah, this happens. And if you don't believe any of those advice, go and read Books of Blood Volume 1, and you realize that I'm right. Alright, because Clive Barker did that, and he did that amazingly well. So who are you to do something different? If you liked this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, get Served Cold. The link is below, and I'll see you soon. Thank you for watching.